Last summer, I read a blog post entitled "The Invisible Latina Intellectual," written by Dr. Grisel Acosta. In it, she describes an experience she commonly has walking across the university campus where she teaches, where she is often mistaken for a student, in spite of the fact that she is a PhD, grain, and in her 40s. As a Latina professor who is also in her 40s and grain, I had this aha moment when someone describes an experience that you thought was just your own. Like Acosta, I do not see this as a compliment. Instead, I see it as a subtle affirmation of what I often feel, the imposter syndrome. That noise buzzing in the back of my head, always saying, "You don't belong here." Masked in a compliment about youth is an assumption about what a professor looks like, and it's not a Latina. It's not me. As a scholar of religion, I've spent the majority of my life trying to tell the stories of Latin American, Caribbean, and Latina women. I want to talk to you about our intellectual foremothers, but I also want you to think about the everyday knowledge of our abuelas, our tías, and our primas, those wise Latinas, as once described by Justice Sonia Sotomayor. When I was a college student, I never questioned the fact that I never read any Latina or Latin American women authors. How can you miss something that you don't know exists? I never had a Latina or a Latino professor because at my university, the people that looked like me were most likely cleaning the university classrooms instead of standing in front of them. And so I was fortunate enough to stumble into classes that told me the history and the stories that I always knew existed. And so in my time with you today, I not only want to share with you a few of the mujeres that are part of my intellectual autobiography, I also want to argue that they should be part of yours. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz is a 17th century Mexican nun, and she's considered one of the greatest figures in Spanish colonial letters. She wrote poetry, plays, devotional writings, and prose. In spite of the fact that she spent the majority of her life cloistered in a convent, she actually had international fame during her lifetime. This recognition led to the scrutiny of church authorities, who felt it was inappropriate for a woman to get so much attention. Sor Juana, at the end of her life, is eventually silenced by the Catholic Church. She is forced to sell all her books and to stop writing because she dared to write theology. She dared to write about God in an era where that was exclusively for men. One of Sor Juana's last writings is entitled La Respuesta a Sor Filotea, known as the response in English. In it, Sor Juana weaves scripture, philosophy, theology, and litanies of women to justify women's right to education. She says that her intellect is a gift of God and not a curse. In the response, she describes a time when the Inquisition forbade her from reading for 3 months. However, they could not shut down her mind. Instead of studying texts, she studied the world around her. What did Sor Juana study? She studied everyday life. Observations of the convent's dormitories led to lessons on geometry. Observing 2 girls playing tops led to experiments with flour and other experiments in the kitchen. She found cooking with eggs had excellent results. These experiments lead her to say, what do women know besides philosophies of the kitchen? Sor Juana is sarcastically challenging the assumption that the gender-coded spaces of the domestic sphere are empty of intellectual value. That quote is followed by probably my favorite statement in Sor Juana's corpus, when she writes, "Had Aristotle cooked, he would have written a great deal more." That last sentence makes me think about my mother. It also makes me think about my grandmother, my aunts, my cousins, all those women in my family that kept us together and often go unrecognized. Growing up, I didn't think I had any role models. I had one anti-role model, my mother. My house was a typical Cuban patriarchy, where it was a hierarchy with my father on the top and my mother at the bottom. He ruled the home, and so I saw my mother as weak. And so it was not my mother who I wanted to be like. I didn't want to be like her at all. Instead, it was my father who I emulated, whose praise I always sought. My father had a library in his study that contained books that covered Cuban history, art, culture, you name it. As a child, one set of books particularly caught my eye: the writings of Lydia Cabrera. Now, it could be their topic, which was Afro-Cuban religions, or it could be because they were one of the only books written by women. But I used to thumb through those books as a child and read the different passages and look at the photos. Decades later, as a scholar of Afro-Cuban religion, I re-encountered Cabrera. I learned that when she died, she left her archives to the University of Miami, where I teach. And one day, as I sat in the Cuban Heritage Collection, looking at her archives and trying to enter into the world of Cabrera, my interest was cemented. I was looking at a folder of clippings when she was given an award by the University of Miami. And as I turned a page, I saw a photo of the ceremony. And sitting in the front row were my parents. The invitation was clear. Lydia Cabrera is an ethnographer and anthropologist from the first half of the 20th century, and she has one of the most substantial documentations of Afro-Cuban religions. You cannot understand Afro-Cuban religion or Cuban culture as a whole without studying her. Similar to Sor Juana, she is self-taught. Also similar to Sor Juana, she is often marginalized by the academy. And it is from Cabrera that I learned that Cuba was, as she described it, permeated with African influences. I realized that while my parents had raised me to love and be proud of everything Cuban, what they meant was what was white Cuban. And so what Sor Juana taught me about gender, Cabrera taught me about race. Those women also forced me to confront the patriarchy in my background. I called myself a feminist, yet I still saw my mother as an anti-hero. And I wish I could tell you that I came to that realization sooner, but it was after her mind had been ravaged by Alzheimer's for years that I came to realize that I did have a role model growing up, and she was my mother. I also realized that I had other Latina and other Latin American women as role models. Some I knew in my life, others I met in books. Some were historical, like Sor Juana and Cabrera, and some emerged from the imagination of writers like Sandra Cisneros, Julia Alvarez, and Cristina Garcia. And you may think you need to be a Latina to get their work, but you don't. No one ever told me I had to be British to read Shakespeare, Greek to read Plato, male to understand Hemingway. Those writers exist in a universal bubble that is stripped of their gender, their race, and their culture. And maybe if we stopped labeling writers that are women as women writers, or authors that are African American as Black writers, and just see them as writers and authors, then we would be exposed to the complexity, the diversity, and the richness of our intellectual heritage. We would see the everyday wisdom of our mothers and our grandmothers, and we would start to realize that people who look like me are professors too. Thank you.